As far back as in 1935, at the Rockefeller Institute of Medical Research in the USA, an eminent man of science, Alexis Carrel, brought in there along with architect Isamu Noguchi and people of similar standing to contemplate the phenomena of life, had remarked, "For the first time in the history of humanity, a crumbling civilization is capable of discerning the causes of decay. For the first time, it has at its disposal the gigantic strength of science. Will we utilize this knowledge and power? It is our only hope of escaping the fate common to all great civilizations of the past. Our destiny is in our hands. On the new road, we must now go forward." Alexis Carrel was reiterating the power of science to reshape our world, and yet he had also come to believe that, and I quote, "Any modification in our surroundings inevitably and profoundly disturbs all living beings. We must therefore ascertain the extent of the transformation imposed by science upon the ancestral mode of life and consequently upon ourselves." Members of the audience, with eminent architects, urban planners, designers, faculty members, students, members of the industry, and not the very least, Sarita Vijayan, the brand and editorial head of Indian Architect and Builder, and a team at the Jasubai Media, on the occasion of AEC World Expo's third 361 Degrees conference since 2005 December, it is a proud privilege to stand at this platform and be able to speak on Earth Matters. I'm here to propose a model that refutes the argument that science alone has the power of logic and organization, that it could well be mindsets of people, not science alone, as crucial to understanding why people practice design and sustainability the way they do, particularly in culturally mediated societies such as in India. And I will try to do this, raising the issue of why and how we could be designing against certain odds by proposing a model I have conceptualized, one that taps into our worldviews and not into economic systems, as is usually the case. And although economic systems are easier to achieve because they're quantifiable, but we ask the final question, can indeed the industrial societies be a part of this very mythical idiom? I have defined the context for this presentation to be in the best spirit of design, which believes that architectural space can be a great reference point for building all kinds of design, from the built space to the handheld product, from the macro to the minuscule, exemplified beautifully in Charles Eames's conception of the power of 10 in ascending and descending order. But even more inspiring and pertinent to us is the case of India, where it's commonly known that this continuum of space as a reference point for design is itself written into our own culture, integrally defining the relationship between the craftsman and the product. Two issues that remain fundamental to what and how we design are, one, the question of determining a product's preferred identity before and while embarking upon designing it, if the product is to be contextual to the needs of the users. And secondly, the crucial and emerging issue of how it can be made compliant with existing statutory and anti-hazards norms if a product is to become a sustainable part of a given environment. In other words, how do we make design sustainable? Now, universal as this might sound, there may be no one way to achieve this, and although in recent times worldwide this has become a battle cry, with sustainability assuming a new and independent dimension of a discipline and equally matched by an impressive slew of definitions and characterizations such as green design, ecological footprinting, recycling, conservation, eco-product, organic farming, etc. Somehow these are words that are struggling to find a mind share, at least in these very terms, with our own people. Now, why this no-show in India with ideas in sustainability, one might ask, when, as we know, India has led the way with best practices. This is because, as ideas, these are not new for us. These are blind spots. where traditionally designing in our culture across the millennia has always assumed that, first of all, a product is viable when it has been designed out of available resources and hence becomes sustainable to use as well as to build. And secondly, thus designed, a product willfully finds its way and calling, its identity and its calling in its localized context. Now, how do we achieve this? One way to understand how sustainability works in different cultures, like I said, is not necessarily through their economic systems, as we often tend to do, but instead through the prism of the worldviews that mark these societies. While this may sound more difficult than pursuing economic logic, it gives us a unique opportunity to go beyond the familiar, to seek answers that may be more long-lasting. Now, what I'm about to say may sound a bit astonishing for the industrialized societies, but worldviews have always been shaped by how societies approach their relationships with nature, each carving out a distinct relationship between man and nature, thereby dividing societies around two distinct worldviews. One that has been predicated on the atom as a material unit in the way a scientist looks at physical properties, seen to be entirely innate and incapable of anything beyond its physical properties, but entirely tangible and hence quantifiable. In this, man's role is to step in, to reshape the atom's innateness into a force, thereby giving man supreme command over nature. Welcome to the world of the atomistic worldview, driven by logic and defined by materialist, mechanistic principles. It is one that seeks to find comfort in quantitative, structurally defined explanations, one where man becomes the center point of creation by orchestrating the various atoms around him and creating only as he deems fit, and one where the conversion of the atom's innateness into a force gives man a sense of being able to imbue the inanimate with life, something of a godlike power that we often see in Hollywood science fiction films. As mentioned, this condition of man's complete sense of control over nature via the atom is best described as an atomistic worldview. The other way to look at nature would be through an organic mythic worldview, which is predicated on animism, which says everything in creation is alive in some sense, with its roots in the belief that the earth is a living being that nourishes all inanimate objects. Nature occupies central position in the animistic worldview and can neither be subordinated nor harnessed by man, nor is nature measurable in tangible terms alone, and hence the worship of nature. Animism goes back to the beginnings of civilization 4,000 years and beyond, and works as a belief system that translates into nature worship for such societies, usually of pre-industrial nature, such as the native Indian societies in America, the native Indian societies in South America, and so on. In India, animism translates into looking at the earth as Prithvi, one of 5 elements of nature, making it sacrosanct and hence worshipped as mother, which we call Prakriti, or even the goddess Devi. In animism, man submits to nature to flow with both its rhythms as well as its catharsis. It is for nature to suggest how we use her resources, and it is for man to worship the idea of such a potent force that helps make human life, as indeed even non-human life, more meaningful. As we also know, there is a tendency to associate the atomistic worldview with the ways of the modern and the animisms with that of the traditional, with modernism a derivative of the machine's implicit edge in controlling the forces of nature and in its association with powerful economic systems, making atomism today the more dominant worldview. The reason why India remains unique is because the sharply defining lines between atomism and animism begin to blur in our country, with the traditional and the modern living concurrently, cohabiting entirely common living spaces. What does this blurring of lines do for us? And why has this ongoing phenomenon suddenly begun to look also intriguing? For one, the industrial societies of the West are now having to interface with the emerging markets of Brazil, China, Mexico, Indonesia and such, and it's vexing for them to see how India deals with its strong presence of traditional rites of passages in otherwise vibrant industrial spaces. The rituals and practices, for example, that are held during the annual